The crystalline chamber floated in the darkness of space, orbiting a neutron star that pulsed with ancient light. Inside, representatives from 47 different species gathered in a circle, their forms ranging from towering insectoids to floating gas clouds contained in protective spheres. The emergency session had been called 3 cycles ago, and still, no solution had been found. Admiral Jake Morrison stood near the outer ring of the chamber, his hands clasped behind his back. He wore the dark blue uniform of Earth's expeditionary fleet, a sight that still drew curious glances from the older species. Humanity had only joined the Galactic Council 12 years ago, barely a heartbeat in the timeline of civilizations that had existed for millennia. Beside him, Dr. Lisa Warren shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She had been Earth's primary ambassador for the past 5 years, and Morrison had never seen her look this worried. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her eyes tracked the holographic display that dominated the center of the chamber. The display showed a map of the galaxy's outer rim. 14 star systems glowed red, each one a grave marker for a civilization that no longer existed. The Krell swarm had consumed them all, stripping entire worlds down to barren rock, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. Council Arbiter Velthon rose from his seat, his insectoid form towering over most of the other representatives. His chitinous armor gleamed under the chamber's artificial light, and his compound eyes reflected the red markers on the map. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the translation devices that allowed the different species to understand each other. The combined defense fleet has engaged the Krell in 7 different systems, Velthon announced, his mandibles clicking with each word. In every engagement, we have suffered catastrophic losses. Our tactical simulations suggest that if the Krell maintain their current rate of expansion, they will reach Council-protected space within 6 months. A wave of distressed sounds filled the chamber. Some species clicked, others hummed, and a few emitted low-frequency vibrations that Morrison felt in his chest rather than heard with his ears. Lisa leaned closer to Morrison and whispered, "They're terrified. Most of these species have never faced an enemy like this. They've spent thousands of years fighting border skirmishes and trade disputes, not wars of extinction." Morrison nodded but said nothing. He had read every report available on the Krell. The swarm operated as a hive mind, coordinating billions of individual organisms across multiple star systems simultaneously. They didn't negotiate, didn't retreat, and didn't show mercy. They simply consumed everything in their path and moved on to the next target. A representative from the Thalian Concordat, a species that resembled bipedal salamanders, raised a webbed hand. "What of the reinforcements from the inner systems? Surely the core worlds can provide additional ships." Velthon's antennae drooped. A gesture Morrison had learned indicated disappointment or resignation. "The core worlds are already providing everything they can spare. We are stretched thin across too many defensive positions. The Krell attack simultaneously on multiple fronts, forcing us to divide our forces." Morrison caught Lisa's eye and gave her a slight nod. She straightened her shoulders and stepped forward into the speaking circle, a breach of protocol since humanity was considered a junior member of the Council. Several representatives turned their various sensory organs toward her, some with curiosity, others with clear annoyance. "Honored Arbiter," Lisa began, her voice steady despite the attention. "Earth would like to offer assistance in the defense against the Krell swarm." The chamber fell silent for a moment. Then several species began making sounds that Morrison's translator interpreted as laughter or disbelief. Velthon tilted his head, studying Lisa with his compound eyes. "Ambassador Warren," he said, his tone carrying what Morrison recognized as barely concealed condescension. "Humanity's offer is noted. However, your species has been part of our community for only 12 cycles. Your military capabilities, while adequate for your own defense, would be insignificant against a threat of this magnitude." Lisa's jaw tightened, but she maintained her diplomatic composure. "With respect, Arbiter, you haven't seen what our fleet can do. We may not have the numbers of the older civilizations, but we have methods that might prove effective." Another representative, this one from a species that resembled crystalline formations, spoke up. "The human fleet consists of what? 40 vessels? The Council has deployed 17,000 ships and we are still losing ground. What could 40 ships possibly accomplish?" Morrison watched as Lisa glanced back at him. He gave her another small nod. encouraging her to continue. Our ships are designed differently, Lisa explained. Our tactics come from a different evolutionary background. We would like the opportunity to prove ourselves. Belthon raised one clawed appendage, silencing the murmurs that had begun to circulate. Very well. Humanity may contribute its fleet to the defensive effort. However, given your inexperience with threats of this scale, we will assign you to rearguard positions. You will protect evacuation routes and provide support to civilian transports. This is the most your fleet can reasonably accomplish without becoming a liability. Morrison saw the flash of anger in Lisa's eyes, but she bowed her head in acceptance. Thank you, Arbiter. We will serve where we are needed most. The council session continued for another 2 hours, discussing logistics and defensive strategies that Morrison knew would fail. The council's approach to warfare was fundamentally defensive, focused on holding territory and protecting borders. It was the natural approach for species that had evolved as prey, always looking over their shoulders for predators, always building walls and seeking safety in numbers. But Morrison had spent 20 years in Earth's military, rising through the ranks during humanity's brief but violent expansion into their own solar system. He had studied the wars of human history, from ancient tribal conflicts to the devastating world wars of the 20th century. He knew something the Council had forgotten or perhaps never understood. Sometimes the best defense was a relentless, calculated offense. As the session adjourned, Morrison and Lisa made their way back to the docking port where their shuttle waited. Once they were inside and the doors sealed behind them, Lisa let out a long breath. "Rearguard duty," she said, shaking her head. "They're putting us in the safest possible position because they think we'll just get in the way." Morrison settled into the pilot's seat and began the pre-flight sequence. "They're assigning us where they think we'll do the least harm." "That's fine." Lisa looked at him sharply. "You're planning something." Morrison allowed himself a small smile as the shuttle detached from the council station. Through the viewport, he could see the human fleet waiting in formation. 40 ships that represented the best of Earth's engineering and the accumulated lessons of a species that had clawed its way to the top of its own planet's food chain. "I'm planning to follow our orders," Morrison said calmly. "We'll protect what needs protecting. We'll serve where we're needed most." He paused, his eyes fixed on the distant stars where the Krell swarm continued its inexorable advance. "But nobody said we had to do it their way." The shuttle accelerated toward the fleet, leaving the council station behind. In the distance, the neutron star pulsed its ancient rhythm, indifferent to the gathering storm that would soon test whether the galaxy's civilizations could survive, or whether a new apex predator would take their place. Morrison opened a secure channel to his captains and spoke 4 words that would change everything. "Begin Operation Apex Protocols." The bridge of the UES Valiant hummed with quiet activity as Admiral Jake Morrison reviewed the tactical displays. The flagship was larger than most vessels in the human fleet, but compared to the massive dreadnoughts of the council races, it was practically a scout ship. Morrison preferred it that way. Smaller meant faster, and faster meant options. Captain Nina Hayes stood beside him, her arms crossed as she studied the same information. She had been Morrison's second-in-command for 3 years, and in that time, they had developed an almost telepathic understanding of each other's tactical thinking. Where Morrison was patient and methodical, Nina was aggressive and instinctive. Together they made a formidable team. "The Council wants us positioned here," Nina said, pointing to a spot on the display that was 3 systems away from the nearest Krell activity. "Maximum safety, minimum relevance." Lieutenant Ben Cole, a young officer barely 2 years out of the academy, looked up from his station. "Sir, shouldn't we at least try to work with the Council fleet? They have experience fighting the Krell, even if they're losing. We're completely untested against this enemy." Morrison turned to face his bridge crew. Every eye was on him now, waiting to see if Earth's military would follow Council doctrine or forge its own path. This was the moment that would define not just this campaign, but humanity's place in the larger galactic community. "Pull up the battle reports from the last 7 engagements," Morrison ordered. The main display shifted, showing recordings from various Council ships. The footage was brutal and one-sided. Krell bioships swarmed in massive clusters, overwhelming defensive formations through sheer numbers. When Council vessels tried to maintain formation, the Krell simply flowed around them like water around rocks. When they tried to pursue, the Krell scattered and regrouped faster than the larger ships could react. "Notice anything?" Morrison asked. Nina spoke first. They're fighting to hold ground. Standard defensive positioning, textbook fleet formations. They're trying to create an unbreakable line. Exactly, Morrison said. They're prey animals who learn to build spaceships. Their instinct is to form a herd, present a united front, and hope the predator goes away. But the Krell aren't going away. They're predators too, and they've learned to hunt herds. Ben frowned, his young face troubled. But sir, we're outnumbered 40-1. If we break formation and scatter like you're suggesting, won't we be even more vulnerable? Dr. Lisa Warren entered the bridge at that moment, having just returned from the council station. She had been listening to the conversation through the ship's intercom. Lieutenant, may I show you something? She approached the display and called up a different set of images. These were from Earth, ancient footage from nature documentaries. The first showed a pack of wolves pursuing a herd of elk through deep snow. The elk were larger, stronger, and had numbers on their side. But the wolves were patient, testing the herd, looking for weakness. When they found an animal that was slower or weaker, they isolated it and brought it down through coordinated effort. The second video showed human hunters from thousands of years ago, before modern technology. They tracked a large animal for days, never giving it a chance to rest, slowly exhausting it until it could no longer run. Then they moved in for the kill. Earth is a death world, Lisa explained. Most species in the Council evolved on planets where the ecosystem was relatively balanced. Predators existed, but they weren't the dominant force. Earth is different. On our planet, predators and prey evolved in constant competition, pushing each other to greater and greater extremes. She changed the display again, this time showing comparative evolutionary charts. Most Council species evolved as prey or scavengers. Their survival strategies focused on hiding, fleeing, or forming large groups for protection. Humans evolved as persistence hunters and pack predators. We didn't outrun our prey or overpower it with strength. We outlasted it. We coordinated with our pack. We used tools and tactics Ben was beginning to understand. So when the Council fights the Krell, it's prey fighting a predator. They're using strategies that work against other prey species but not against hunters. Correct, Morrison said. The Krell are a hive mind operating as one massive organism. They hunt through overwhelming numbers and perfect coordination. The Council tries to counter this by forming larger groups and stronger defensive positions. But that's exactly what the Krell want. It makes Council fleets easy to find and easier to swarm. Nina pulled up a schematic of the human fleet. Unlike Council vessels, which were designed for prolonged engagements and could sustain heavy damage, human ships were sleeker and faster. They carried more missiles and fewer energy weapons, prioritizing the ability to strike hard from unexpected angles and then disappear before the enemy could respond. We built our fleet based on lessons from Earth's naval history, Nina explained. Submarine warfare, carrier tactics, wolfpack strategies. We don't try to win through superior firepower or better armor. We win through superior positioning and timing. Morrison walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. The Council has given us rear guard duty. They expect us to sit in a safe zone and wait for refugees. That's fine. We'll protect the evacuation routes. He turned back to his crew and his expression was hard. But we're also going to hunt. Over the next 6 hours, Morrison briefed his 40 ship captains on Operation Apex. The plan was audacious and would be considered reckless by Council standards. Instead of maintaining a defensive position, the human fleet would go dark, reducing their sensor signature to almost nothing. They would track Krell movements, identify supply lines and resource-gathering operations, and strike with overwhelming force at isolated targets. Captain Sam Carter, who commanded a group of stealth frigates, raised a concern during the briefing. Admiral, the Council specifically ordered us to rear guard positions. If we go off mission, we could face serious political consequences. Morrison nodded, acknowledging the point. Earth's government has given me discretionary authority in military matters. The Council assigned us a position, but they didn't specify how we had to fulfill our duties. We're protecting evacuation routes. We're just doing it by attacking the enemy's ability to threaten those routes in the first place. Nina added, besides, the worst they can do is send us home, and honestly, if we fail here, there might not be a Council left to send us anywhere. The captains accepted their orders and returned to their ships. Morrison could see the mixture of excitement and nervousness in their eyes. They were about to commit the human fleet to a strategy that went against everything the Council believed about warfare. If they succeeded, They would prove that humanity had something valuable to offer the galaxy. If they failed, they would confirm every doubt the Council had about Earth's military capabilities. Ben approached Morrison as the bridge crew prepared for departure. "Sir, I have a question. The Krell have destroyed 14 civilizations. They've beaten fleets much larger than ours. What makes you think we can succeed where everyone else has failed?" Morrison considered the question carefully before answering. "The Krell are predators, Ben. They're used to hunting prey that runs from them or huddles together in fear. They've probably never encountered prey that hunts back." He placed a hand on the young officer's shoulder. "We're not going to wait for them to find us. We're not going to form a defensive line and hope for the best. We're going to track them, study them, and when the moment is right, we're going to show them what happens when you threaten a human's pack." The Valiant's engines powered up, and the fleet began to move. They didn't head for their assigned rearguard position. Instead, they vectored toward the Tertian system, where intelligence reports indicated a large Krell presence was currently stripping a planet of its resources. Lisa stood beside Morrison, watching the stars stream past as the fleet accelerated. "The Council is going to be furious when they realize we're not where we're supposed to be." Morrison allowed himself a thin smile. "They're going to be even more furious when they realize we're better at this than they are." He opened a fleet-wide channel. "All ships initiate stealth protocols. We're going hunting." Throughout the fleet, human crews began shutting down non-essential systems, reducing their energy signatures. Ships that had been clearly visible on sensors moments ago began to fade, disappearing into the darkness of space like wolves melting into a forest. The human fleet had entered enemy territory, and they were no longer thinking like defenders. They were thinking like predators. The Tertian system was dying. Its fourth planet, once home to a thriving colony of the Metherian people, was now a husk. Massive Krell bioships hovered in orbit, extending tendrils down to the surface that stripped away soil, water, and organic matter. What had been a world of blue oceans and green forests was rapidly becoming a gray wasteland. Admiral Jake Morrison watched from the command chair of the Valiant, his expression unreadable. The fleet had been in the system for 18 hours, hidden in the dense asteroid field that ringed the fifth planet. Human ships drifted among the rocks with all non-essential systems powered down, virtually invisible to the Krell's biosensors. "How many Krell vessels?" Morrison asked quietly. Lieutenant Ben Cole studied his tactical display, his fingers moving quickly across the controls. "Confirmed count is 237, sir. Mostly Harvester-class bioships, but there are approximately 40 Warrior-class vessels providing escort." Commander Greg Walsh, the Valiant's helmsman, whistled low. "That's more than we expected. 5-to-1 odds, and that's if we count all our ships against just their warriors." Nina Hayes leaned against the tactical station, her eyes fixed on the Krell formation. She had been watching them for hours, studying their movements like a hunter studying prey. "They're not random. Look at the pattern. The Harvesters work in clusters of 7, each cluster protected by 2 warriors. The warriors rotate positions every 43 minutes. Morrison nodded. He had noticed the same thing. "They're coordinated by the hive mind, but there's still structure to their tactics. That structure is predictable." In the distance, the Council's defensive fleet was engaging the Krell near the second planet. The battle was visible on long-range sensors, and it was going exactly as every other Council engagement had gone. The Council ships formed a wall of vessels, presenting a unified front. The Krell simply surrounded them, attacking from multiple angles simultaneously. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes, their debris adding to the growing field of wreckage that littered the system. "The Council fleet is losing," Ben reported, his voice tight. "They've lost 20 ships in the last hour. At this rate, they'll have to retreat within 3 hours." Morrison stood and walked to the main viewport. He could see the asteroid they were hiding behind, a massive rock that dwarfed even the Valiant. Beyond it, the Krell continued their harvest, unconcerned with the battle happening millions of kilometers away. "Captain Hayes," Morrison said, his voice calm and measured. "Take destroyers 7 through 12 and execute Strike Package Alpha. Target the Harvester cluster at coordinates Mark 479. Nina's eyes lit up with predatory anticipation. "Aye, sir. Time to show these bugs what Earth's wolves can do." She left the bridge at a run, heading for her own command ship. Within minutes, 6 human destroyers detached from the asteroid field, their movements slow and careful. They drifted on minimal power, using the natural gravitational currents to conserve energy and reduce their sensor signature. The Krell continued their harvest, unaware of the danger approaching. The hive mind was focused on the Council fleet, treating the battle as it had treated every other engagement. Overwhelm the enemy with numbers, consume their resources, move on to the next target. It was a strategy that had worked for them across 14 conquered systems. Nina's strike group moved into position, coming at the harvester cluster from below the orbital plane, where the Krell's sensor coverage was weakest. Human vessels were smaller and quieter than Council ships, designed with lessons learned from submarine warfare. The Krell's biosensors were optimized to detect the energy signatures of larger vessels, not the minimal output of a ship running on emergency power. All ships, weapons free, Nina transmitted on the strike group's private channel. Hit hard, hit fast, and be gone before they know what happened. The 6 destroyers powered up simultaneously, their missile bays opening as targeting systems locked onto the nearest harvesters. In less than 3 seconds, over 200 missiles screamed toward their targets. Conventional warheads mixed with specialized munitions designed by human engineers specifically for fighting organic ships. The Krell harvesters never had a chance. The first wave of missiles struck with devastating precision, tearing through the bioships' organic hulls and detonating deep inside their structures. The specialized warheads released cascades of thermal energy that flash-fried the Krell's internal systems. 7 massive harvesters erupted in flames, their dying bioelectric screams transmitted across the hive mind's communication network. The 2 Krell warriors escorting that cluster immediately broke formation, accelerating toward the human ships with frightening speed, but Nina had already given the order to withdraw. The destroyers cut power again and dove back toward the asteroid field, their momentum carrying them into the protective cover of the rocks before the Krell warriors could close the distance. On the Valiant's bridge, Morrison watched the strike play out with satisfaction. First blood to humanity. Commander Walsh, note the Krell response time. How long between our strike and their warrior reaction? 7.3 seconds, sir, Greg reported. And they went straight for our ships instead of forming a defensive perimeter around the other harvesters. They're aggressive, Morrison observed. Good for offense, but it creates openings. Their warriors are fast, but they're not thinking independently. The hive mind recognized a threat and sent the nearest warriors to eliminate it. Predictable. Ben was staring at his display in amazement. Sir, the Council fleet is reporting confusion. They're asking who authorized a strike on the Krell's rear position. Tell them we encountered a target of opportunity while on patrol, Morrison said. No lies, just not the complete truth. The Krell were already adapting. The hive mind pulled 20 warriors away from the battle with the Council fleet and repositioned them to guard the harvesters more closely. This created gaps in their formation around the Council ships, but the Council commanders were too focused on their defensive positions to exploit the opening. Morrison opened a channel to his other captains. The enemy has shown us how they respond to a threat. They prioritize protecting their resource gathering over tactical advantage. We're going to use that against them. Over the next 6 hours, Morrison executed a campaign of surgical strikes that would have been impossible for the larger, slower Council ships. Small groups of human vessels would power up, strike a target, and disappear before the Krell could respond in force. Each strike was carefully planned to maximize damage while minimizing risk. Captain Sam Carter led his stealth frigates in an attack on a Krell communication relay, a pulsing organic structure that the hive mind used to coordinate across long distances. The relay's destruction caused temporary confusion in an entire sector of the Krell swarm, causing 3 warrior groups to fire on each other before the hive mind could re-establish control. The Council fleet, still engaged in their losing battle, began to notice that something was changing. Krell warriors that should have been pressing the attack were instead breaking off to respond to threats that appeared and vanished like ghosts. The pressure on the Council line eased, giving them time to regroup and reorganize. Morrison stood at the viewport watching as another Krell harvester exploded in the distance. His expression was thoughtful, analytical. The Krell were powerful, coordinated, and relentless, but they were also predictable. They had evolved to overwhelm prey through numbers and tireless assault. They had never needed to develop defensive tactics or strategic patience because nothing they had encountered before had the ability to hurt them without being destroyed in turn. Sir, Ben called out, his voice excited. The Krell are withdrawing from the second planet. They're consolidating their forces around the harvesting operation. Morrison nodded slowly. The hive mind was learning that the harvest was vulnerable. By pulling forces back to protect it, they were giving up their offensive pressure on the Council fleet. It was a tactical retreat, the first one the Krell had ever been observed making. Good, Morrison said quietly. They're starting to think defensively. That means they're starting to feel like prey instead of predators. He turned to his crew. Maintain harassment protocols. I want the Krell to feel hunted. Every time they think they've secured a position, hit them from a new angle. Keep them off balance. Nina's voice came through the communication channel, breathless with adrenaline. Admiral, that was beautiful. We took out 7 harvesters and didn't lose a single ship. Request permission to execute another strike. Denied, Morrison replied. Return to the asteroid field and power down. We've made our point. Now we wait and watch. Predators don't exhaust themselves chasing every target. They wait for the right moment. The human fleet faded back into the darkness, becoming ghosts among the asteroids once more. The Krell circled their remaining harvesters like nervous animals, their warrior vessels scanning constantly for threats they could no longer predict or prevent. For the first time in their existence, the Krell swarm had encountered prey that refused to run. They had found something that hunted back, something that struck from shadows and vanished before the hive mind could coordinate a response. They had found humanity and nothing in. 3 weeks after the first strike in the Tertian system, the war had changed in ways the Galactic Council was struggling to understand. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the communication room of the Valiant, facing the holographic projection of Council Arbiter Velthon. The insectoid's mandibles were clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. You are assigned to rearguard duty, Velthon said, his translated voice sharp with anger. Yet our sensors show human vessels operating in 12 different systems, many of them deep in contested space. You have engaged the Krell without authorization and disrupted coordinated Council operations. Morrison kept his expression neutral. With respect, Arbiter, we were assigned to protect evacuation routes. Every Krell harvester we destroy is one less threat to civilian transports. Every communication relay we eliminate reduces the Krell's ability to coordinate attacks on refugee convoys. You are using semantics to justify insubordination, Velthon countered. Your tactics are reckless. You strike without proper reconnaissance, without adequate support, without coordination with Council forces. Our tactics are effective, Morrison replied calmly. In 3 weeks, the human fleet has destroyed 47 Krell harvesters, 16 communication relays, and damaged or destroyed over 60 warrior-class bioships. We've done this while suffering only 3 ships damaged and 0 ships destroyed. Can the Council fleet make the same claim? Velthon's antennae drooped and he fell silent. Both of them knew the answer. The Council fleet had lost over 400 ships in the same time period, and despite their superior numbers, they had managed to destroy fewer Krell vessels than humanity's small force. Dr. Lisa Warren, who was present for the call, stepped forward. Arbiter, perhaps we should focus on results rather than methods. The human fleet's operations have created breathing room for Council forces. Your casualties have decreased by 30% since we began our campaign. Because the Krell are diverting resources to hunt your ships, Velthon said, though his tone had lost some of its heat. They are obsessed with eliminating the human threat. 3 separate hive clusters have abandoned their harvesting operations to pursue your vessels. Morrison exchanged a glance with Lisa. That was exactly what they had been hoping for. If the Krell are chasing us instead of consuming worlds, then we're succeeding in our mission to protect Council citizens. The communication ended shortly after, with Velthon neither approving nor officially condemning human operations. It was the closest thing to permission Morrison was likely to get. As the hologram faded, Lisa let out a long breath. He's scared, she said. Not of the Krell, of us. The Council has existed for thousands of years with one basic understanding of warfare. We're showing them that everything they believe is wrong. Morrison nodded and returned to the bridge where Captain Nina Hayes was waiting with a tactical update. Her uniform was rumpled and there were dark circles under her eyes. She had been leading strike operations almost continuously for the past week, running on stimulants and sheer determination. We've got a situation developing in the Caldrus sector, Nina reported. Long-range scouts have identified a Krell breeding station. It's massive, Admiral. Estimates suggest it could produce enough new warrior bioships to replace everything the swarm has lost in the past month. Morrison studied the reconnaissance data. The breeding station was a grotesque organic structure, kilometers across, pulsing with bioelectric energy. It was heavily defended by over 100 warrior vessels and surrounded by a field of biological mines that would detonate if any ship came too close. The Council won't go near it, Nina continued. Their simulations suggest that a successful attack would require at least 500 ships and would result in 70% casualties. They've classified it as a strategic loss and are planning to evacuate the surrounding systems instead. But you have a plan, Morrison said. It wasn't a question. He could see it in Nina's eyes, that predatory gleam that meant she had identified a weakness. Nina pulled up a detailed analysis of the breeding station's defenses. The biological mines respond to energy signatures above a certain threshold. Council ships are too big and hot to get close without triggering them. But our frigates running on minimal power might be able to slip through the minefield. Might, Morrison repeated. What's the probability of success? 40%, Nina admitted. But if we succeed, we set the Krell back months. If we fail, we lose maybe 6 ships. Morrison considered the mathematics. 6 ships was 15% of his total fleet, a significant loss. But if the breeding station continued operations, the Krell would be able to replace their losses faster than humanity could inflict them. The strategic value was clear. Do it, he ordered. But Nina, I want you to lead from the Valiant, not from your own ship. You've been in combat continuously for 3 weeks. You need rest. Nina started to protest, but Morrison cut her off with a look. That's an order, Captain. Your tactical skills are needed, but you're no good to anyone if exhaustion causes you to make a mistake. She reluctantly agreed, and over the next 12 hours, the strike force assembled. 16 frigates, each one crewed by volunteers who understood the risks. They would approach the breeding station in complete silence, drifting on inertia alone, using the natural gravitational currents of the system to navigate through the minefield. Captain Sam Carter commanded the strike force. His background was in Earth submarine service, and he understood the psychology of silent running better than anyone else in the fleet. As his ships approached the minefield, he transmitted a final message to Morrison. Admiral, if this works, drinks are on you. If it doesn't, tell my wife I went out hunting. Morrison acknowledged the message and then watched on the tactical display as 16 tiny dots crept toward the massive biological structure. Each ship was so cold that it was barely distinguishable from the background radiation of space. The biological mines pulsed with their own energy, creating a deadly web around the breeding station. The first frigate entered the minefield. Seconds passed like hours. Then the second ship followed, then the third. One by one, the frigates slipped through gaps in the mine pattern, moving so slowly and quietly that the Krell's sensors couldn't distinguish them from space debris. Lieutenant Ben Cole monitored the operation from his station, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his console. 12 ships through, 13, 14. The 15th frigate drifted too close to a mine. The biological sensor detected something, and the mine began to pulse faster, building toward detonation. On the frigate's bridge, the crew held their breath, not daring to even power up their engines for fear of making themselves more visible. The mine pulsed one final time and went dormant. False alarm. The frigate continued forward. All 16 ships are through the minefield, Ben reported, relief evident in his voice. Now came the hard part. Sam's frigates powered up simultaneously, their reactors going from standby to full combat readiness in seconds. The breeding station's defenders reacted instantly, but they were positioned on the outer edge of the minefield, separated from the frigates by the very defenses meant to protect the station. Sam's ships unleashed everything they had: missiles, railgun rounds, and specialized biological weapons that human scientists had developed based on captured Krell tissue samples. The breeding station's organic hull ruptured in dozens of places, venting atmosphere and biofluids into space. Krell warriors tried to respond, but they had to navigate carefully through their own minefield or risk destruction. By the time they reached attack range, Sam's frigates were already withdrawing, using the station's massive structure as cover. Direct hit on the primary reproductive chamber, Ben announced. Secondary explosions throughout the structure. The station is breaking apart. Morrison watched as the massive structure collapsed in on itself, its bioelectric signature flickering and dying. The loss would cripple the Krell's ability to replace warriors in this sector for months. All ships reporting minimal damage, Nina said from beside him. We did it. We actually did it. But Morrison's attention was already on the next challenge. The destruction of the breeding station had achieved something unexpected. Across the sector, Krell forces were abandoning their attacks on Council positions and converging on human fleet locations. The hive mind had finally recognized humanity as the primary threat and was responding accordingly. "They're coming for us now," Commander Greg Walsh observed. "Every Krell warrior in 3 systems is vectoring toward our positions." Morrison opened a fleet-wide channel. "All ships initiate dispersal protocol Omega. We're not going to sit still and let them find us. We're going to lead them on a chase, and we're going to make them pay for every light year they follow." What followed over the next 10 days became known in Council records as the Running Battle of the Outer Rim. Human ships scattered across multiple systems, never staying in one place long enough for the Krell to mass their forces. When Krell warriors pursued, human vessels would lead them into ambushes where other human ships waited with weapons ready. The Krell were fast and coordinated, but humans were unpredictable. Morrison's fleet used every trick in the book. False sensor signatures. The reconnaissance data was almost impossible to believe. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the Valiant's war room, staring at the holographic display that showed the Krell home cluster. It was a nightmare made real. A massive installation of organic structures orbiting a dying red giant star. Bioships numbered in the millions, so densely packed that they formed a living shell around the central structures. Captain Nina Hayes let out a low whistle. "That's not a fleet. That's an entire ecosystem built for war." Dr. Lisa Warren manipulated the display, highlighting the largest structure at the center. "That's the Overmind. Intelligence reports suggest it's the central consciousness that coordinates the entire Krell swarm. Every bioship, every warrior, every decision flows through that structure." Morrison had been tracking the Krell forces for 2 months now, following them as they retreated from Council space. The swarm had abandoned 4 systems completely, pulling back to consolidate around their home territory. It was unprecedented behavior for the Krell, and it confirmed what Morrison had suspected. The hive mind was capable of fear. "The Council won't authorize an attack," Lisa continued. "They're calling it suicide. Even with everything we've accomplished, they think this is too much." Morrison turned away from the display and looked at his assembled officers. Nina was there, along with Sam Carter, Greg Walsh, Ben Cole, and the captains of every remaining human ship. The fleet had been reduced to 31 operational vessels after 2 months of constant operations. They were exhausted, running low on supplies, and facing an enemy force that outnumbered them thousands to 1. "We've come too far to stop now," Morrison said quietly. "If we let the Krell rebuild here, everything we've done will be meaningless. They'll recover their numbers and start the cycle again. More worlds will burn. More civilizations will die." Sam Carter leaned back in his chair. "We're not afraid of the odds, Admiral. We've been fighting impossible battles since we started this campaign. But we need to be realistic. 31 ships against millions? That's not a battle. That's the execution." "Unless we change the rules," Morrison replied. He brought up a new tactical overlay on the display. "We're not going to fight their fleet. We're going to kill the Overmind. Cut off the head and the body dies." Nina studied the plan, her eyes moving quickly across the data. "It's insane, but it might work. If the Overmind is truly the central intelligence, destroying it would leave millions of bioships without coordination. They'd scatter or shut down." "That's a big if," Greg pointed out. "We don't know for certain how the Krell consciousness works. Destroying the Overmind might not do anything." Lisa stepped forward. "Actually, we do know. I've been analyzing the Krell biology from every encounter. When we destroyed their communication relays, the bioships in those sectors showed signs of confusion and decreased efficiency. The hive mind requires constant connection. Without the Overmind, that connection breaks." Ben Cole, who had grown considerably in confidence over the past 2 months, raised a practical concern. "Even if we can reach the Overmind, how do we destroy it? That thing is the size of a small moon and protected by millions of warriors." Morrison's expression hardened. "We go in fast, we go in hard, and we don't stop for anything. I'm calling it Predator mode. Every ship strips down to essential systems only. No shields unless absolutely necessary. Minimum life support, everything we have goes to engines and weapons. We become pure killing machines." The room fell silent as the officers absorbed what Morrison was proposing. Predator mode was a theoretical combat doctrine that human engineers had developed, but never tested. It meant abandoning all defensive systems and safety margins, pushing ships beyond their normal operational limits. It was desperate, dangerous, and exactly the kind of aggressive tactic that had made humanity successful so far. "We'll have one chance," Morrison continued. "The Krell will see us coming. They'll throw everything they have at us, but we're not going to fight them. We're going to punch straight through their formation like a spear through flesh. Nina, you'll lead the vanguard. Sam, your frigates will create chaos on the flanks. Greg, you and I will take the Valiant straight to the Overmind." Nina grinned fiercely. "Finally, we get to stop being subtle." Over the next 48 hours, the human fleet prepared for the final assault. Engineers stripped away armor plating to reduce mass. Weapon systems were recalibrated for maximum output, even if it meant they would burn out after sustained use. Crews said their goodbyes and wrote final messages to loved ones back on Earth. Lisa sent a detailed report to the Council, explaining what humanity was about to attempt. She received responses ranging from admiration to horror. Council Arbiter Velthon sent a personal message asking Morrison to reconsider, warning that the loss of the human fleet would be a devastating blow to morale. Morrison's response was simple: "We're not planning to lose." The human fleet departed from their staging area and began the journey to the Krell home cluster. They didn't bother with stealth this time. They broadcast their approach on all frequencies, ensuring that the Krell Overmind would see them coming. As they crossed into Krell territory, the swarm began to react. Bioships detached from the home cluster and moved to intercept, forming a defensive wall between the humans and the Overmind. The numbers were staggering. Morrison's sensors counted over 50,000 Krell warriors moving to defensive positions. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison," he broadcast on the fleet channel. "In a few minutes, we're going to do something that every tactical manual in the galaxy says is impossible. We're going to charge straight into the heart of the enemy's strongest position and tear it out. Remember your training. Remember why we're here. And remember that we're human. We don't know how to quit." The fleet accelerated, building speed as they approached the Krell defensive line. When they were in range, Morrison gave the order that would define the entire engagement. "All ships activate Predator mode. Take us in." Throughout the fleet, ships transformed. Energy that normally powered shields and life support systems was redirected to engines and weapons. The human vessels surged forward with unprecedented speed, becoming missiles with crews inside. The Krell opened fire first, launching biological projectiles and energy weapons. The human fleet didn't try to dodge or defend. They simply absorbed the hits and kept coming. Ships were damaged, some critically, but none of them slowed down. Nina's vanguard hit the Krell line like a hammer. Her destroyer group punched through the bioships with concentrated fire, creating a gap in the defensive formation. Behind her, the rest of the fleet poured through that gap, expanding it with each passing second. Krell warriors swarmed toward them from all directions. The space around the human fleet became a chaotic mess of explosions, debris, and bioships. But Morrison's strategy was working. The Krell were trying to surround and destroy the human fleet using their traditional overwhelming numbers approach. They didn't understand that humanity wasn't trying to win a battle. They were trying to reach a specific target. Sam Carter's frigates broke away from the main group and began attacking Krell formations from unexpected angles. It wasn't about destroying enemy ships. It was about creating confusion and forcing the Krell to split their attention. "Overmind is 200,000 kilometers ahead," Greg reported from the helm. "Multiple Krell battle clusters are moving to intercept." "Punch through them," Morrison ordered. The Valiant's weapons fired continuously, the ship's advanced targeting systems identifying weak points in Krell bioarmor and exploiting them with ruthless efficiency. Other human ships did the same, their crews working with machine-like precision despite the chaos around them. Lieutenant Ben Cole's ship, the destroyer Relentless, was separated from the main fleet when a cluster of Krell warriors cut off its route. Ben faced a choice: try to rejoin the fleet or complete his assigned mission of destroying a Krell command node that was coordinating local defenses. He chose the mission. The Relentless turned away from safety and drove straight into the heart of the Krell formation. His crew destroyed the command node, but the ship took devastating damage in the process. As power systems failed and the hull began to breach, Ben transmitted a final message: "Mission accomplished. Make it count." The destruction of the command node caused exactly what Ben had hoped for. 3 entire Krell battle clusters lost coordination and began firing on each other, creating a gap in the defensive line that the human fleet exploited mercilessly. Morrison watched the tactical display as his fleet carved through Krell forces like a knife through flesh. They had lost 7 ships so far, and another 5 were so badly damaged that they were operating on backup systems alone, but they were getting closer. Suddenly, the Council fleet appeared on long-range sensors. Velthon had led over 1,000 Council ships to the Krell home cluster, unable to let humanity fight alone. The Council vessels didn't use Predator mode, but they engaged the Krell forces on the flanks, drawing away warriors that would have otherwise attacked the human fleet. "The Council is here," Lisa said, her voice filled with emotion. "They came to help." Morrison nodded grimly. "All ships, final push. Everything we have. Nina, clear us a path." Nina's vanguard fired every remaining weapon, burning out targeting.